Hi, I'm John Stevenson, and we're going to be looking at Judges chapters 1 through 5 in our continuing study of the historical books of the Old Testament. The book of Judges is the bridge that takes us from Moses and Joshua and their ministries to the kings of Israel. The kings haven't come at this point. The Israelites are being ruled and overseen and led by a group of what we call judges. And part of their job is to judge, but also they're going to be leaders. In the book of Joshua, we see mostly victory, but as we come now to Judges, we're going to see a lot of defeat. There will be some occasional victories, occasional judges that rise up and bring some victory, but a lot of defeat in the middle. In Joshua, we have one man, Joshua himself, being prominent. In the book of Judges, we're going to have a number of men and women fill this role of being a judge. In Joshua, it's the story of Israel's faith. In Judges, it's the story of Israel's apostasy. In Joshua, we see someone's taking a stand for God. In Judges, we see people, the Israelites, continually turning away from God. In Joshua, we see the sins of the Canaanites that are being judged. In Judges, it's the sin of the Israelites that are being judged. The date of composition, I want to say an early date, but when I say an early date, I don't mean that the book of Judges is written in the days of the judges. You have to wait until the story is completed and then you can write about it. And so when I say an early date is indicated for portions of the book, I don't mean the book as a whole. There's going to be some things that indicate some later composition. But on the one hand, you see that the Jebusites are said to live in Jerusalem to this day. Judges chapter 1, verse 21. Um, they're not going to be there by the time David captures Jerusalem. They won't be in Jerusalem anymore. So at least this portion of the book is written prior to that event where David captures Jerusalem. Likewise, Sidon is described as a chief city of the Phoenicians. That's going to be the case up into the period of the kings. It's going to be one of the chief. I don't know if it's the chief anymore. There might be some others that have greater levels of security and so on. Um, but once we get to the fall of the southern kingdom, once we get to Nebuchadnezzar, Sidon is just going to be a possession of first the Babylonians and then the Persians and then the Greeks, and it will go on and on and on. Um, in Judges chapters 17, 18, 19, and then at the end of the book, we're going to see a refrain that in those days Israel had no king. There was no king in Israel. Now, the fact that you say this sort of presupposes that by the time this is written, they do have kings in Israel, or else you wouldn't say that. It used to be that we didn't have such and such, which indicates that now we do. And so it seems that the book of Judges is written in its final composition by the time we do have kings in Israel. In Joshua chapter 18, verse 30, we read that the sons of Dan set up for themselves the graven image, and Jonathan, the son of Gershom, the son of Manasseh, he and his sons were priests to the tribe of the Danites, notice, until the day of the captivity of the land. It sounds like the Babylonian captivity. I think that would be a fair assumption, which is telling us that the book of Judges took place much earlier, but not written into its current format until the Babylonian captivity. At least this portion of the book wasn't written, and this is to be sure a later portion, or it's a I don't know if you can call it an appendix. Maybe that's too strong of a term. But there's two stories at the end. We're not even going to see them this time, but we'll see them in the future when we get there. Now, the purpose of the book, first of all, to demonstrate the disastrous effects of compromise, because there's going to be a lot of compromise in this book where the Israelites were supposed to drive out their enemies and don't. They were supposed to worship only God, and they don't. There's all sorts of things that the Israelites are supposed to do and don't. It's an apologetic for Israel's monarchy, as it shows Israel's need for a king in that line that we just saw. In those days, there was no king in Israel, and things were not going good as a result. They needed a king from Israel, but in particular, they needed a king and we're going to see this when we get there, from Bethlehem, because there's an anti-Benjamite slant at the end of the book. There's some problems with the tribe of Benjamin that we're going to see. And remember that King Saul was from the tribe of Benjamin. So we needed a king, but not Saul, somebody else. And you know who we're talking about. We need the king from Bethlehem. And of course, we're talking about King David, but from a New Testament perspective, we're talking ultimately King Jesus. Now, chapters 1 and 2 give us in chapter 1, we see sort of a partial conquest. We see some success with Judah and Simeon, Othniel and Caleb, but then we also see some failure where at times they're able to drive out their enemies, and at other times they're not. And by the time you get to the end of chapter 1, there's still Canaanites in the land, and they're going to stay there. Then we get to chapter 2. The angel of the Lord comes and there's a warning of judgment. You have the death of Joshua, which had taken place at the end of the book of Joshua, but there's a little bit of an overlap here. We're told that story again, and the next generation is coming. And notice chapter 2, verse 11 at the bottom of this chart. We're going to see a series of sin cycles of sin, judgment, repentance, and deliverance. Let's look at that now. Have laid out in that chapter, at the end of chapter 2, a series of events that would happen again and again and again, where God would raise up a deliverer for the people, and he would deliver them from their enemies. And then the Israelites, in response, as things got good, they would do evil in the sight of the Lord. They would sin, and next the Lord sold them into the hands of their enemies, and he does this as a judgment upon their unfaithfulness. And the people, the Israelites, would cry out to the Lord in repentance, "Lord, save us!" And the Lord would raise up a deliverer, and that cycle goes again and again and again and again throughout the whole middle section of the book of Judges. So let's start in Judges chapter 3 and verse 12. This is one of those falling away periods. Now the sons of Israel again did evil in the sight of the Lord. So the Lord strengthened Eglon, the king of Moab. You can see Moab on the map. It's to the east of the Dead Sea and south of the Arnon River. There's actually two rivers. One is the Arnon to the north of Moab. The other one is the Zered River to the south, almost like a wadi, really. It's seasonal. Sometimes it's got water in it. Sometimes it's just a valley. But that still marks the southern border. And so, and notice, Eglon, the king of Moab, comes up against Israel because they had done evil in the sight of the Lord. And he, that is Eglon, gathered to himself the sons of Ammon and Amalek. So you have the Ammonites, who are sort of cousins to the Moabites, living to their north and a little bit to the east. And also Amalek. Now I put him here on the map where you can see it, but they're both in this area and also further south, in the north end of the Sinai Peninsula. And between these three enemies, he went and banded up and defeated. When it says Israel, there's no country of Israel. The territory of the tribes of Israel is what we're talking about at this time. And they possessed the city of the palm trees, chapter 3, verse 13. Now, we saw in an earlier class, the city of the palm trees is a nickname for what we call Jericho. Jericho had already been destroyed, but it's a great location, and there's no longer a big city there anymore. That's not going to be rebuilt yet, but still, it's a great place, and it's a good sort of meeting place and a good place to bivouac and to set up your camp, and that's what Eglon does. Verse 15, but when the sons of Israel cried to the Lord raised up a deliverer for them, Ehud, the son of Gera, the Benjamite. So not all Benjamites are going to be bad. This guy's going to be a hero. But notice he's called a left-handed man. So he's both a Benjamite, but he's also left-handed. Now, that doesn't seem any big deal in our culture. My older brother is left-handed. It means that he, when he started playing guitar, he plays the same guitar that I do. So he didn't restring his guitar. Some left-handed people do that. But it means that he maybe needed a different sort of catcher's mitt when he played baseball, things like that. Not a big deal. But in that culture, both then and somewhat even today, if you go to the Middle East, I've been to the Middle East a few different times, a number of different countries in the Middle East, and every time I've been there, if I had a guide, they would check, just to make sure that I know that it's inappropriate to touch anybody with your left hand. The right hand is the hand of fellowship. The left hand is the hand for other things. Remember, they didn't have any toilet paper back then, so use your imagination. And so if somebody, and literally what this says, he was a man bound in his right hand. That's what it means to be a left-handed man. Now, was it because of some infirmary, or was he just like my brother, that he just got into the habit of using his hand? I don't know. But that's going to play a part in the story. Notice the sons of Israel sent tribute by him to Eglon, the king of Moab. Ehud made himself, in preparation for this meeting, made himself a sword, which had two edges. Now, swords were not something the Israelites had a lot of. We're going to find this out later on, that the Israelites didn't have much in the way of weaponry. So Ehud has to fashion this himself, a cubit in length. A cubit is the length of your fingertip to your elbow. So roughly, depending on the size of the person using it, about 18 inches. And he bound it on his right thigh under his cloak. So right thigh, if he's left-handed, if he's bound in his right hand, they're not going to be expecting that. They might not search it. And he presented the tribute to Eglon, king of Moab. And then we have this little extra detail that's mentioned. Now, Eglon was a very fat man. Um, I think the hint is maybe that he had grown fat by stealing from the Israelites. And whatever the case, being fat in our culture, we think, oh, that's sort of not too nice. In that culture, that was considered a sign of prestige, although here it's going to be both prestige, but also something we're going to maybe even laugh at. He's going to be sort of the butt of a joke before the story is over. Well, verse 18, it came about when he had finished presenting the tribute, that is Ehud, that he sent away the people who had carried the tribute. Whatever it was, he couldn't carry it by himself, and remember he's only got one working hand, and it's not the right hand. I say that pun intended. Verse 19, but he himself turned back from the idols which were at Gilgal, and said, I have a secret message for you, O king. And he, the king, King Eglon, said, keep silence. And all who attended him left him. The only way to keep a secret is to make sure nobody else hears it. Ehud came to him while he was sitting in his cool roof chamber. I'm not sure how that translates, but remember, you have different cultures, but we can loosely translate this maybe his refreshment room, or can I say it this way, his restroom. But don't think just like Baron quarters where there's just a toilet and that's all they have. Perhaps there was a bit more to it than that, but still it would serve that purpose. And so this is a way to get some privacy. And he had said, I have a message from God for you. And he arose from his seat. Ehud stretched out his left hand, because he's left-handed, and he's bound in his right hand, took the sword from his right thigh and thrust it into his belly, is the belly of Eglon. The handle also went in after the blade, and the fat, remember that he's a very fat man, the fat closed over the blade, which means that he shoved the blade into him, and the fat closed over the blade, and to look at him, you can't see the weapon. You can't see the entry point. It's all hidden in his great big belly. You're supposed to see this, and let me just say, this is Israelite humor. It might not translate that well into our 21st century sensibilities. But notice he did not draw the sword out of his belly, and the refuse came out. I guess that's why he was in the cool roof chamber. There were things to do there, and those things in the heat of the moment got done, but not necessarily the way that had been planned or designed. Then Ehud went out into the vestibule and shut the doors of the roof chamber behind him and locked them. Verse 24, when he had gone out, his servants came and looked, and behold, the doors of the roof chamber were locked. And they said, these are the guards, the attendants, he is only relieving himself in the cool room. He's in the restroom. He's doing what you're supposed to do in the restroom. Um, I don't know if there was some grunting going on inside, some pain, but they thought, well, okay, maybe he had too much to eat, constipation, whatever that is. And so they're standing outside as they think that he's relieving himself in the cool room. Verse 25, they waited until they became anxious. He's taking a long time in there, but behold, he did not open the doors of the roof chamber. Therefore, they took the key and opened them, and behold, their master had fallen to the floor dead. Wow. What took place? Remember, they can't see the weapon. It's hidden inside of him. Verse 26, now Ehud escaped while they were delaying, and he passed by the idols and escaped to Seirah. Verse 27, it came about when he had arrived that he blew the trumpet in the hill country of Ephraim, and the sons of Israel went down with him from the hill country, and he was in front of them. So now that the Moabites, with their king dead, have been thrown into confusion, Ehud is going to take this opportunity to lead the Israelites and the tribe of Ephraim in particular into driving them out of the area. He said to them, pursue them, for the Lord has given your enemies, the Moabites, into your hands. So they went down after him and seized the fords of the Jordan opposite Moab. Remember how Joshua had crossed the Jordan River, but depending on the time of the year, that river could be overflowing its banks. The fact that they have to seize the fords meant that it wasn't crossable at all sorts of places, but only at a few narrow places or maybe a few wide places. But they seized the fords and did not allow anyone to cross. And they struck down at that time people that were trapped on the wrong side of the Jordan, about 10,000 Moabites, all robust and valiant men, and no one escaped. And so this great victory over Moab, God has led them in victory, and they enjoy that. Chapter 4, verse 1. Then the sons of Israel again did evil in the sight of the Lord after Ehud had died. So while he was alive, apparently, he leads them in a right way, and they're obeying for a time, but it's short term. And once Ehud has died, they're back to their old sorts of ways. They return to their idol worship. They return to bad living, to not following the Lord. And now judgment's going to come again. Verse 2, and the Lord sold them into the hand of Jabin, king of Canaan, who reigned in Hatzor. Now, we already had Hatzor captured by Joshua, but now there's been a return to Hatzor. And notice the commander of his army was Sisera. Notice just the sound of that. Sisera. It sounds a little bit serpent-like, doesn't it? And I think maybe it's supposed to. Who lived in Harosheth Hagoyim. Now, the term Hagoyim, Ha is the definite article. You always attach the definite article to the word that it's governing. And a goy is a nation or a Gentile. But notice the im, that's plural. So the nations. And then Harosheth is just the carving of Hagoyim, the carving of the nations. I'm not sure how it gets that name, but there's going to be some nations that get carved up in this story. Verse 3, the sons of Israel cried out to the Lord, for he had 900 iron chariots. Now, chariots were the major modern weapon of warfare in this day. If you had chariots, it was like having nuclear missiles. It was like having atomic weapons. And notice the people of the Canaanites, they had 900 iron chariots. Now that doesn't mean they were solid iron, but they would have iron around, like a bit of an iron rim around the wheel, so they're not going to break and fall apart. On this plaque, and this is the plaque that was found at Megiddo, look over to the right and you can see, now it's broken off so you can't see the whole thing, but you can see enough where there's a chariot there. And then in the chariot, you've got captives that are being led, and they're coming before the king who's seated on a throne. And just a way that the Canaanites viewed this sort of weapons of war. And so with these chariots, Sisera was able, and and the king, Jabin, they were able to oppress the sons of Israel severely for 20 years. Verse 4, now Deborah, a prophetess, and that is a prophet who is a woman. Women can be prophets just like men can be prophets. We don't see a lot of women prophets in the Hebrew scriptures, but we see once in a while. And here was a woman who is the wife of Lapidoth, was judging Israel. So she's both a prophetess, but she's also a judge. Again, that's not the norm, but she's the exception that proves that there are sometimes exceptions here. And she was judging Israel at that time. She used to sit under the palm tree of Deborah, and I guess it had become her tree, it's named after her, between Ramah and Bethel in the hill country of Ephraim, and the sons of Israel came up to her for judgment. Now she sent and summoned Barak, the son of Abinoam, from Kadesh Naphtali, it's up in the region around Galilee, and said to him, behold, the Lord, the God of Israel, has commanded, go and march to Mount Tabor. Mount Tabor is it's at the east end of the valley of Jezreel. And take with you 10,000 men from the sons of Naphtali, after all, that's where he's from, and from the sons of Zebulun, that's a tribe that's right next door. I will draw out to you Sisera, the commander of Jabin's army, with his chariots and his many troops to the river Kishon, and I will give him into your hand. So notice we have Mount Tabor mentioned, but also the river of Kishon. Now these are not next to each other. Let's look at a map. You can see Mount Tabor to the southwest of the Sea of Galilee. And then if you look to the west of there, you have the Kishon River. It's really just a stream. This is not a big river. I've been to it. I'm going to show you a picture of it in a bit, but the picture doesn't do it justice because in the picture you can't really see the water because it's all covered by foliage, by trees and bushes and things like that. It's not a big river, but it flows across the southern end of the valley and it flows eventually into the Mediterranean. So here's Mount Tabor, and like I said, that's at the east end of this wide open valley of Jezreel, and it just rises up almost like a big big bump in the middle of the valley at the east end of the valley. And so they're going to start here, but the battle's going to move across to the other end of the battle. They're going to assemble here, but then they'll move across to the other end of the valley, and that's where we're going to see the Kishon river, stream, however you want to describe it. Verse 8, then Barak said to her, if you will go with me, then I will go. But if you will not go with me, I will not go. Now he was told to go, and he said, I'm only going to obey if, Deborah, you will go with me. And she said, I will surely go with you. Nevertheless, the honor, and remember, this is an honor and shame culture, so this was an important thing. The honor shall not be yours on the journey that you are about to take, for the Lord will sell Sisera into the hands of a woman. And let me just say, Deborah's not the woman. She's going to go along, but somebody else will win the final victory. And it's going to be a woman. Spoiler alert. Then Deborah arose and went with Barak to Kadesh. Sisera called together all his chariots, 900 iron chariots. This is the state-of-the-art weaponry, and all the people who were with him from Harosheth Hagoyim to the river Kishon. So they're all located at the east and maybe the east end of the valley, but they're sort of filling that whole end of the valley. That's a lot of chariots. And then there's other troops that are in support. There's a lot of people here. Verse 15, the Lord routed Sisera and all his chariots and all his army with the edge of the sword before Barak. Now, we're not given any details in the story. I think maybe we're given some hints. When we get to chapter 5, there's going to be a song that Deborah sings that talks about the battle, but it's poetry, so we have to be careful not to take it too literally. But there's going to be a reference there to the flood of Kishon. And I can't help but wonder, was there some rain? Was there some mud? Was there a river that's usually really sort of tiny that overflowed its banks? I don't know because we're not given the details. But Barak wins, and Sisera alighted from his chariot. And now, if he wants to get away, why not use your chariot? But maybe he couldn't. Maybe the chariot was stuck. I don't know if it was stuck in the mud or what happened here. But he flees away on foot, verse 16. But Barak pursued the chariots and the army as far as Harosheth Hagoyim, and all the army of Sisera fell by the edge of the sword. Not even one was left. The army is completely routed. And now here's that reference in Judges chapter 5, verse 21. The torrent of Kishon swept them away. That's part of a poetic song. So is that literal? Is that figurative? The ancient torrent, the torrent Kishon, and maybe this climactic conditions, led to benefiting the Israelites and overcoming this tactical advantage that Sisera had. I don't know. If I take it literally, and I'm inclined to, maybe I shouldn't, but maybe something happened there with the river. Now, what you're looking at is Tel Kishon. There is a village known as Kishon. It has not been excavated, so you're looking at that hill, and I'm looking down at it. I'm up on the mountain when I'm taking this picture up on Mount Carmel. But see, just this side of the mountain, there's sort of not the road, but to the further than the road, there's sort of a string of bushes and the occasional tree. That's the Kishon. It's a tiny little stream. It's not a big rushing river, but maybe it became that and overflowed its banks and just made a mess of the entire area for this battle. Now, verse 17. Sisera, he escaped. He fled away on foot to the tent of Jael, the wife of Heber the Kenite, for there was peace between Jabin, the king of Hatzor, and the house of Heber the Canaanite. There wasn't supposed to be peace. They were at odds, but they had made peace. And so we're not going to be told anything else about this Heber the Canaanite, except that he's married to somebody named Jael. And he's not going to even be in the picture, but she is. Verse 18, Jael went out to meet Sisera and said to him, "Turn aside, my master. Turn aside to me." Notice she's speaking like an ally. She's speaking words of comfort. "Do not be afraid." And he turned aside to her into the tent, and she covered him with a rug. "Here, you hide here. You're all wet. Maybe it's been raining. I don't know the details, but you take it easy here. I've got you." And again, excuse the pun. I've got you covered. So this is Jael. She's going to be the hero of the story or heroine of the story. He said to her, "Please give me a little water to drink, for I'm thirsty." Oh, you don't want water. She opened a bottle of milk and gave him a drink. And then she covered him, milk and cookies. Here you go. Verse 20, he said to her, "Stand in the doorway of the tent, and it shall be if anyone comes and inquires of you and says, 'Is there anyone here?' that you shall say no." So you hide me, you lie, you play the part. Verse 21, but Jael, Heber's wife, took a tent peg, now this is once he's asleep, and seized a hammer in her hand, and went secretly to him, and drove the tent peg into his temple, that is, through the side of his head, and it went through into the ground, for he was sound asleep and exhausted. So he died. He never woke up. He never knew what hit him. And notice the way the story ends. Into his temple, into his head, we have a woman slaying the enemy of God's people with a blow to the head. Now, that's a familiar line, something that had been promised way back in the early chapters of Genesis. You remember the promise in the Garden of Eden where God said, "I'll put enmity between you and the woman, and between your seed and her seed. He shall bruise you on the head, and you will bruise him on the heel." Well, here is that now that prophecy was speaking about Jesus. It was fulfilled in him. But before we get there, here's a picture, a type, a pattern that's being established, and it's going to be repeated again and again, of a woman slaying the enemies of God's people with a blow to the head. So that the promise that would eventually be seen in Jesus is already becoming a pattern before God's people.